Vreeland was educated in Europe, North Africa, and the United States, after which he pursued a career in photography. In the late 60s and early 70s, Vreeland worked as an assistant to Irving Penn and Richard Avedon and studied film at the New York University. In 1977, he met Kyongla Rato Rinpoche, founder of the Tibet Center, and became a monk in 1985. Vreeland is the editor of the books An Open Heart, a New York Times bestseller, and the 2011 release, A Profound Mind, both authored by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He is also founder of Photos for Rato, a series of photographic exhibitions that have been held in France, Italy, Germany, India, and the US, which underwrote through the sale of his photographs a large part of the construction of Rato Monastery in India. In 2011, an exhibition of Vreeland's photographs titled Return to the Roof of the World was held at the Leica Gallery in New York. The exhibition was traveled to Taipei, Taiwan, and most recently to the Ann Norton Sculpture Garden Museum in West Palm Beach, Florida. On April 20th, 2012, His Holiness the Dalai Lama appointed Vreeland abbot of Rato Monastery, and this was the first time that a Westerner had been appointed abbot of an important Tibetan Buddhist monastery. On making the appointment, His Holiness stated, "Your special duty is to bridge Tibetan tradition and the Western world." Vreeland divides his time between the Tibet Center in New York and Rato Dunstang in India. Vreeland has since been tasked with introducing secular ethics into modern education in the West. So I welcome all of you once again, and I hope all of you have a nice smile on your face and get rid of your angriness. Okay, so we start now without wasting any time. Yes, the floor is yours. And I welcome Dr. Anita Dudhane, who's here. She's always been helping us coordinate these lectures under the Dalai Lama chair. And I welcome her as well here. And thank you for your patience in waiting for us to start the lecture. Thanks.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here, and I also apologize for the fact that this is starting late and that you've been waiting. I want to thank Dr. Professor Savita Karkar for inviting me, for your very kind and generous introduction. I'm very thankful to Rajiv Mehrotra, who reached out to me and invited me to come here. He is the head of the Foundation for Universal Responsibility of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I thank Anita for all your help and support. I was asked to talk on an introduction to the practices of the Nalanda tradition. That is the title that Rajiv Mehrotra asked that I address. And in the title is a big one, and I'm not qualified to talk about the actual studies in Nalanda Monastery, but the practices of the Nalanda tradition with an emphasis on the word practices was, I thought, something that I could share with you. In other words, how did the monks, because I think that they were primarily monks living in Nalanda monastery, practice? Not what did they study, but how did they live? And why might I be able to talk to you about this? Because I come from a Buddhist monastic university. I should be very careful. We're not allowed to use the word university unless we are recognized by the University Grants Commission and the Indian government. But if we talk about a university as an important academic institution, that we are. And so I will permit myself to talk to you a little bit about the way we practice. May I just ask a technical question about the allotment of time? I think that you may have mentioned to me I should talk for about half an hour, 45 minutes, and then we can you can ask questions and we can discuss. Is that? Today we're being given a little bit of leeway here. Okay. So, I have just arrived here from the very distant state of Karnataka, where if one were to say that any place today in the 21st century was a reincarnation of or a reenactment of Nalanda, it would be existing in Karnataka, right next to here. It's rather extraordinary that in this 21st century, what is it, 15, 16 centuries after the establishment of Nalanda, there exists in Karnataka, within a Tibetan refugee settlement, not one, but 5 Nalandas. There are 5 of these education institutes, monastic Buddhist education institutes. I happen to think that's extraordinary. That I mean, as I just conjure it up talking to you, that right here, 300 kilometers away, there exist these institutions where the ideas and the actual practices that were engaged in Nalanda all those years ago continue to be alive, continue to thrive. And I'm saying this at the very beginning of my talk to try to bring to you all here within this university the fact that the ancient continues to live, that the ancient is alive and thriving, that it is not something from the past. It's not like going to a museum and seeing. It's still there. Now, what is it that is still there? We talk about the fact that Nalanda University, as Professor Kerkar said in her introduction, was an academic institution that was founded in the 4th, 5th century AD. And all of that is extraordinary because it had never existed before. But actually, what happened before the establishment of Nalanda, what it was that is now recognized as being the establishment of Nalanda, is that up in northern India, in Bihar, in the Gangetic plains there existed a thriving interest in pursuit of truth, of knowledge. If you look at, for example, the story of the Buddha. Um, the Buddha, as you all know, was said to have been born within a princely society, family, and as he began to doubt the validity of the very comfortable environment he was born to and living in, he decided to leave his palace and pursue truth. So the whole idea of leaving society and devoting yourself to the pursuit of an understanding of the meaning of life, of truth, was thriving in India. And it is that let's say, percolated and that was cultivated in this area, in Bihar, in Rajgir. I think we can locate it there. I think it would be sort of the center of Bihar. And people came from all traditions, all intellectual traditions. As a result of their own pursuits, they would come there. It was a community of people interested in testing their ideas, interested in going a little bit deeper as a result of having their ideas challenged. It was a place where ideas were alive. It was a place where the exchange of ideas was alive. It was a place where a true seeker of truth would be willing to put his or her ideas of what might be correct aside if the person were to recognize flaws in the logic of his or her position. There was an integrity to the pursuit of knowledge that existed. And out of that integrity, out of that respect for ideas that might actually be superior to one's own, there became a respect for a tradition of debate. Debate is the process of two people challenging each other and really challenging their ideas, putting forth their own ideas and hearing the opponent attack those ideas and thereby revealing flaws in one's reasoning. The whole process of debate existed in that area, which we now call Nalanda. That whole process of debate was not a Buddhist institution, as Nalanda eventually became. It went far beyond the sort of the confines of a particular intellectual or philosophical idea. It was open. And as a result of this pursuit of truth that existed there, as a result of, I'll permit myself to say, Buddhism's ability to point out the correctness of its particular. I better shut up here. I shouldn't be talking of Buddhism this way. But as this institution became, the ideas that were coming out of it began to fall within the realm of Buddhism, it became a Buddhist institution. And I think that when it was formed, Nalanda was a Buddhist institution. And interestingly, the monastery, which was square with 4 doors, or the main. There were 4 gates, and each gate, the gatekeeper who tended it was one of the finest philosopher debaters in the monastery, so that the protection of the monastery was not a protection that was keeping out the bandits. It was keeping out illogical ideas. It was keeping out superfluous ideas. It was, the whole idea of it was to maintain truth, and so the idea was that if an outside idea made it by or through the gatekeeper, it was an idea to listen to. And there is, in the history of Nalanda, there are times when a great philosopher and logician from a non-Buddhist school made his way past the gatekeeper into the monastery, and I think at one point took over the monastery, in that his philosophical and logical ideas were seen to be superior to the prevailing ideas within the monastery. And I don't know the full history of that particular takeover of the monastery, but within the monastery, as philosophical ideas were refined by means of the debates that took place within the monastery, eventually the prevailing philosophical view of Nalanda became that of, I think, Nagarjuna and his main disciple, Chandrakirti. However, that's really the historical layout, if you like. And when I say layout, not physical layout, but really the conceptual layout of Nalanda, which, as I say, evolved from not being an actual structure to becoming the first university, the first residential university in the world. The ideas, the concepts, and the form of study that existed in Nalanda made their way to Tibet. Interestingly, there was a king of Tibet who invited the abbot of Nalanda, Shantarakshita, to Tibet. And when Shantarakshita came to Tibet, he brought with him two things. He brought with him a great knowledge of Buddhist philosophy and the other philosophies of the time, and he brought with him the monastic order, the monastic rule of a particular, let's say, monastic tradition of Buddhism, the whole. We monks have received our vows from someone who has received his vows, from someone who has received his vows, all the way back to the Buddha. So one of these lineages that was the lineage that Shantarakshita had received his vows through, he then brought to Tibet, so that he brought to Tibet the monastic order. And he founded a monastery, Samye Monastery, and that's really the seed of the beginning of Buddhism in Tibet. And what's interesting about it is that the Buddhism that came to Tibet was of this very intellectual form. The ideas that had been cultivated and that had been tested and scrutinized through debate at Nalanda, it was not only those ideas, but it was the tradition of scrutiny and testing that had been brought to Tibet. And in Tibet, over centuries, this tradition has continued right up to 1959, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many of the monks within the monastic universities of Tibet fled after the takeover of Tibet by the Chinese Communist forces, and the Indian government wonderfully welcomed His Holiness the Dalai Lama and this 100,000 refugees who arrived, and cared for the monastics within this group, permitting them to live together in a place that was organized for them in West Bengal. And there, the monastics maintained this Nalanda tradition, maintained the debates, maintained the process of exploring different philosophical views, assuming them, and then having them challenged in debate as a way of seeing the flaws of those particular views. Eventually, about 10 years later, the Indian government, realizing that these Tibetans were not going back to Tibet anytime soon, that the Chinese were not going to be leaving Tibet anytime soon, the Indian government started to provide these the Tibetans in exile and the monastics with a place to reestablish themselves in exile. And refugee communities were established in different parts of India, and the most important ones are in Karnataka. And I say that, I mean, I find it very funny that it's right here next to you. It's your neighbor. And in Karnataka, there are really 4 important Tibetan refugee communities, of which one of the most important is very close to Hubli, which is about a 5-hour drive from here. 2 of the 3 great monastic universities of Tibet have been reestablished right here near Hubli. And the form of study, the form of life that existed in Nalanda, whatever it is, 1,500 years ago, 15 centuries ago, exists. To tell you a little bit about the person who's standing here telling you about this, I came to India in 1985, just at this time of year, to join one of these monasteries and to start my studies. I had begun studying Buddhism in New York, and I suppose, in a sense, much the way someone going to debate in Nalanda might have eventually joined the monastery and pursued a life of introspection. And I, through my studies, though, as you said, I was a photographer, began to doubt the validity of a life devoted to simply to photography, I'll say, and felt the need to maybe look a little bit deeper and develop an understanding of the meaning of life and the meaning of my life and what I could do with it, and saw that immersing myself in a monastic way of life devoted to this pursuit of truth might be the most valuable thing I could do. And the best place to do it, I realized, was 5 hours from here in Karnataka. And so I came to live here. And I arrived in this refugee community. I took a plane from New York to Bombay, and I took a plane from Bombay to a place called Belgaum, and then I took a bus that eventually brought me to a little town called Mungod, and from Mungod I thought I could walk to the Tibetan settlement, but was told that it would be about a 4-hour walk, and I had the same trunk that I had taken to boarding school when I was 13 years old. There was no way I could walk with it for 4 hours. And so out of the blue appeared a monk in the town of Mungod. And though I didn't speak Tibetan and he didn't speak English, when I said the name of the place I was going, and he found a bus. There was a bus going to some place close, and it was full, but he got the driver to let me sit on the engine, and he put my trunk on the roof, or he found someone to put my trunk on the roof, and we drove through little villages until he suddenly said to the driver, "Okay, stop here," and we got off the bus, and he went onto the roof and handed me my trunk, and again someone appeared who was willing to carry my trunk across a field to this Tibetan settlement, which, when we stopped, I could see in the distance. I could see these yellow roofs and white buildings, and these little specks of maroon who turned out to be monks around the monastery. And as we walked across the field and these little specks grew, suddenly there was this monastic community in the middle of the Deccan plains. Though at first I didn't know any Tibetan, I knew hello and I knew thank you, but I didn't really know which was which. The wrong one would sort of pop out at the wrong time, but anyway, I made it. And soon after beginning, I was taught the rudiments of debate. And it was an interesting way to be thrown into a community and to be thrown into let's call it an intellectual exercise, because I couldn't talk about worldly matters. All I could do was fiddle with little ideas, and I thereby survived. And if one stepped out of my vocabulary, I didn't know what people were talking about. And I knew the word for sound. In Tibetan, the word is ja. And I remember saying to my fellow monks with whom I was meant to be debating, as they would use a word that I didn't know, and I would say, jare, that's just sound. And of course, they didn't know what I meant. And what I meant was, that sound has no meaning to me. And years later, they tease me. They say, you used to say, jare. Anyway, that was a community of Tibetans really maintaining the tradition of scrutinizing ideas in pursuit of truth. And so if you are interested in these concepts of Nalanda, you can actually see it in action. The first thing that is taught when one studies is an idea of logic. And the reason that you study, now I hope there's no one really with a profound understanding of logic here, because I wouldn't be able to defend what we do. However, the idea of studying logic is that it gives you the tools. It provides you with the tools by which you can scrutinize, you can test ideas. You are being taught what is a correct, what would you call it, result of a series of reasons, and what is an incorrect result of a series of reasons. And by it's really sort of like being taught that 2 and 2 are 4, and that the basics of mathematics, because that basic structure of a sort of logical phrase and an understanding of that basic structure becomes the method by which you can actually see whether a structure is valid or a structure isn't. So that's how you begin. And little children who study begin by studying colors, and you learn the root colors, and then you learn branch colors, and you learn the idea of something being a color rather than is a white horse white, or is it a horse? If a white horse is a color, then it's not a horse. If a white horse is colored white, then it is a horse, but it's white in color. And the very simple playing around with these ideas begins to sharpen the minds of the young students, who then apply the sort of basic understanding of these ideas to more complex ideas, and then to actually have the ability to form his or her own understanding of what is true and what isn't. There are some problems in this pedagogy, I think one would say, in that a very fine debater can undermine the understanding of someone who has an understanding of a correct idea, but doesn't have the sort of sophisticated logical ability to defend it. And I might put myself in that latter group, because I can remember debates where I would come home where I had a true understanding of what was correct, and I would be challenged by a very fine debater, and I would find myself, it was as if I was in free fall. I didn't have the things to grab at to put together a defense that would actually uphold what I believed to be right, and I suddenly didn't know what was right and what was wrong. And it was terrifying. It was really like free fall. And we debate usually way into the night. The evening debates start around 8:30 at night, and they go on until 11:30, midnight. And I would come home to my room totally discombobulated, totally, as I say, in free fall, not knowing what was what. And then in the morning I would go and visit my teacher, and I would present to him my dilemmas, and he would laugh, and he would put together the pieces and help me. But he would never say, "This, no, you were right to begin with, this is the way it is." He would just give me a few little facts that would enrich my ability to then maybe defend myself against a better debater. Anyway, that pursuit of truth, that pursuit of ideas is what existed in Nalanda, whatever, 15 centuries ago, and about, I think it was about the 12th century, no, it would be 8th century, 12 centuries ago, 8th century, AD, or does one say BE? What, I don't know what the politically correct way of referring to 8th century, sorry? AD, is when Shantarakshita came and established Samye Monastery and introduced this intellectual pursuit and scrutiny of ideas. It was soon after that, one of his students, Kamalashila, also came from Nalanda to Tibet, And there had been, Buddhism made its way to China long before it came to Tibet. And the practices of Buddhism in China were more, let's say, Zen-like. It was Chan Buddhism, which really emphasized the development of single-pointed concentration and the cultivation of these meditative absorptions. And Shantarakshita had said to the king of Tibet at the time, the form of Buddhism that I have just introduced, that has come from Nalanda, is going to be challenged. And when it is challenged, invite my student Kamalashila to defend this particular form of Buddhism. And sure enough, this Chinese form of Buddhism began to prevail in Tibet. And the king of Tibet at the time said, let us have a debate, let us have a confrontation of these two forms of practice, and I will judge which is to be the, let's say, the state practice of Buddhism in Tibet. And this debate was held before the king, and the practice of Kamalashila, the student of Shantarakshita, was seen to be the more profound, the practice that it was decided would become the form of Buddhism in Tibet. And since then, this pursuit of truth evolved, and monasteries were established in the area around Lhasa, and then throughout Tibet. And it is those monasteries throughout Tibet, following the Nalanda tradition, that eventually came to India in 1959, and then have been reestablishing themselves ever since here. So I don't know how we're doing time-wise, but what I would love to do over the next couple of days is not talk so much about these philosophical concepts and the logical scrutiny of them that existed in Tibet and that now exists here, but talk about the more practical life of a member of Nalanda, of one of the monks there. And there formed in Nalanda a tradition where one would invite each of the elder monks to give a talk on Buddhism. And it was sort of a way of ridding the monastery of those monks who really were superfluous, were seen to be wasting the energies and the resources of the monastery, and giving the monastery a bad name. And so they decided that the way in which that they would rid themselves of these monks would be to have each of the senior monks give a talk where those who really didn't know anything and were wasting their time would be so embarrassed that they would leave the monastery. And there was one monk in particular who was known as the monk of the three actions. He was said to eat, sleep, and defecate. And they were so embarrassed by him that they invited him to please give a talk. And when they invited him to the there are a few different ways in which this particular incident is described, but he was invited to talk, and they made a big throne for him to really embarrass him. And he put his hand up and he brought the throne down just through some kind of magical abilities, and got on the throne, and it lifted up, And he began to talk, and he began to give a series of talks on the practices of someone pursuing the spiritual path and devoting himself or herself to the attainment of enlightenment to better help others. And this monk was called Shanti Deva, and the teaching that he gave is known as the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, or a guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. And so I thought I would take passages from that which really reflect the practices of a Nalanda monk, and discuss them with you over the next few days. I don't know, this might be a good time to for us to talk and for you to ask any questions that you have on this first day. Is that? Yes. So how did the form of debate get structured? I don't really know. I don't know how, well, as you structure, as you develop a structure to a syllogism or a consequence, if something is seen not to meet the criteria of a logical syllogism, that is seen, if you were to say, the horse is white because it is a color, the formation of that would have certain flaws. And if you, as opposed to the color of the elephant, or the elephant is white, the color of the white elephant is white because it is a color, that falls within a correct sort of logical structure of a syllogism, and everything that is to break that down for everyone, the subject, the color of a white elephant is a color because it is white, you could put it that way. And if the color of white elephant is white, it is necessarily a color because the color of a white elephant is a color. I'm really sort of glossing over this because I don't want to weigh this down with a lot of the sort of technicalities of the construction of a syllogism. But once you validly, but you have to have a structure for what is valid inference as opposed to what is not valid inference. And Dignaga actually established, formulated these things back in Nalanda, and that formulation would have provided the guidelines for the debates that existed in Nalanda. And he and his follower Dharmakirti really created the formulation, the structure of formulations, which form the basis of these, what you are talking about, which is the the method of introducing all of this into the Tibetan curriculum many years later. In Tibet, the works of Dignaga and the works of Dharmakirti were studied and were distilled into these study manuals, such as Judra and such as Tarig. Judra is the text that we studied to really establish, it's like an introduction to the categories of things and how to mix them up and play with them. And it becomes the introduction to how to debate. The study of Tarig is the study of the formulation of a syllogism or a sort of logical phrase. And both of those were derived from the works of Dignaga and Dharmakirti from Nalanda. They evolved over time, and actually the monastery that I belong to, in the 14th century, the great reformer of Tibetan Buddhism, Tsongkhapa, said that Ratu Monastery, the monastery I belong to, should be devoted to the study of logic. It should be the place where monks from all over Tibet should come to study logic for a month and a half every year. And so to some place owned by Ratu called Jang, the monks of Drepung, Ganden Sera, the great monastic universities of Lhasa, would come to devote a month and a half to studying the logic of Dignaga and Dharmakirti. And they would debate among themselves and among each other to not necessarily discover something new, objectively new, but to discover something new for themselves, to apply this logic, apply these criteria, and scrutinize and thereby clarify their own ability to understand. I hope that helps with your question.
I'm studying something, memorize words, and the day of the exam, we know quite a lot, perhaps even more than the professor. But the next morning, it's all forgotten. So could we incorporate something like this? When I was studying, we did have debate, but it was on more social subjects and broader, but not on a subject that we were studying. So did that make?
So, the easy answer is yes. However, how one might do that, if in any class, in any subject, if you said to the students, okay, this is what I've taught, this is, instead of saying go home and study, and then sit and write stuff out in your examination, if you said, okay, I want you, each of you, we can take one or two students to defend, and the rest of you, one by one, scrutinize, challenge them in their understanding of the subject, in their understanding of the ramifications of a particular challenge to what they've studied. In other words, bring the process of understanding, the process of scrutinizing, bring it alive, bring vitality to it. All of that gets your mind thinking in ways that it hadn't before about a particular subject. Yes, I think that could be applied to pretty much everything.
So, from the beginning, I don't know whether it existed in the beginning.
I think that I mean, I would think, even evidently, that that the idea of morality, that the idea of an ethical way of life would be very much mixed in with these philosophical ideas. That one couldn't really keep an ethical way of life separate from these philosophical ideas.
Subject of moral science, and now the government has scrapped it off completely. And I think it has made a big effect in the system of education now. I mean, the students which we get, because the insensitivity of students has been increasing now. I mean, that's my observation.
From the 33 years which I'm teaching, when I look at each of the batches, they're concerned about others, about the environment, around people around them. They're only concerned about themselves, my thing, So it's more of, concentrating towards yourself, the education which we impart. So there's something which is going wrong somewhere where, I feel something is wrong. So I feel that, we should have a subject, and if the Nalanda school can design a curriculum of just one paper, for all the lower standards up till the higher level, it would be very beautiful, I think, because it will make the students, I always used to have this feeling that, we should have a subject of moral science, even in higher education.
So I hope that what I will be talking about over the next few days, this text on A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, will address just that, because, as I say, though I don't know whether it existed from the formation of, before the establishment of Nalanda, ethical behavior and the ethical or moral quality of the seeker and the validity of that as an aspect of who that person was and what that person was devoting his or her life to, all of that definitely influenced the whole of Nalanda as a Buddhist monastic institution. The motivation of the Buddhist practitioner or of the spiritual practitioner includes or is really totally motivated by, supported by his or her moral aims. So, yes.
Dalai Lama Foundation. So it is developed by Dalai Lama himself, some of the points, of course. It is available online, you can download it, and many of the schools are accepting the syllabus right now and they're imbibing the syllabus. It's K-12, so kindergarten to 12. Far high, yes, it is developed in stages of development, but K-12 exists already.
In Goa as well as all the colleges. So there are two programs. One is called the C Learning, Social, Emotional, Ethical Learning. And the second program is called the Compassion-Based Cognitive Therapy. So CBCT will be very useful for colleges and for older people, whereas C Learning is for schools. And like we said, we have now facilitators in Goa as well. And we're starting with Sharda Mandir and Sunshine and some of the schools soon.
So I have a very fundamental question. Can morals or ethics be taught in school, or are they a reflection of the society around us? Uh, can they be taught in a classroom? Because I grew up in that syllabus, like reading all those moral stories. It made me a particular kind of person. But when I grew up, I saw the society behaving exactly oppositely, and people getting, rewarded for those behaviors. Uh, you know, so it's just a point that I want to make. Like, can this be taught in schools? Or should the society itself behave in a particular way?
Should it be taught in schools, or what's the second part of it?
Or for all of us to, for this to work effectively, that we reach a point where most of us start behaving ethically, a large majority of the society needs to undergo a ethical cleansing. Not cleanse, no, that's wrong, but not ethical cleansing, not ethnical.
Ethical what?
Cleansing, sort of, like, you get what I mean, like,
Okay.
things work in this society and there are things that don't work. So
We have to develop an ethical cleansing mechanism, maybe like a shower.
Not ethnical, that is very prominent these days.
So, this is what we will be going into, the actual training that this monk introduced in his Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life for cultivating let's say the basis for ethical behavior. Because I think that if you throw ethics at someone or morals and say this is how you should do, this is the way, that's going to stick to the extent that the studies that you were talking about are going to stick.
Can I add something, please? If you throw something like that, that means that you're not ethical, no? Like, that is the basic of that. If you start throwing on somebody ethics or moral, that question your ethic and moral. So,
correct. So the developing an understanding for the reason why one would wish to develop one's moral foundations, how that is helpful to myself, how it is helpful to the environment, those around me, my community, the world, the environment. All of those things, I think, have to really be established for one to begin to assume some kind of ethical responsibility, or the responsibility for developing oneself ethically. And as you say, it's not something you can preach. It's something you have to really live.
So to just answer what you said, what we did with little children was we gave them a goldfish in a bowl. And the children took care of the goldfish for a few days, and they called it Goldie or whatever. And so then after a few days, maybe a week or so, when they developed an attachment to the goldfish, we said, would you spit in the goldfish bowl? And the children were really horrified. They said, but it's Goldie's house. So we said, but there's so many Goldies living in Zuari River. It was really amazing to see the children's reaction. So they realized that the Zuari River also should not be spat in. So if a child can be brought to a conclusion by giving certain facts, and the child is deeply convinced by inference or direct evidence, then the child will go home and also tell its parents, do not throw garbage in the Zuari River because there are lots of Goldies who live in the Zuari River. So because you can't tell the child, because the child will not. But if you give the child or an adult or anyone the facts, I think that's how one can still, I think, teach so-called moral science.
The NEP system has started, there's a lot of demand from the teachers and there's a lot of demand from the students to perform and register whatever they are doing. You have to document everything, give it to higher education. And half of the time goes, the teachers spend their time in documenting what they are doing rather than, increasing their intellectual potential. So, and as a result of this, there are lots of students who get very depressed during the examination. I don't know how this has been related. For the last 2 years, I've seen students getting very depressed during exams. And since I'm the dean of one of the schools, I have many students where actually I've given them a special provision even to answer their answer paper alone in a room. They said they cannot sit among other children and answer their paper. So I said, you can answer in my room, sit there. Something to make them comfortable. But I don't know why this situation comes there. They say, I just cannot. I become blank when I sit with others. So this is just an example. But there are other examples where I don't understand, is it with this system or do they have some problem or is it the education system? Something is going wrong with our education system. For the last 2 years, there's a tremendous increase in the number of depression cases in various schools. So I don't know what the mistake is. That's why I thought that, we have to have one subject because now we have interdisciplinary learning. So we can take subjects from any other school for credit. So there should be something on such aspects where a student has a peace of mind when they are studying and learning something.
I think that we are living in a time when a young person, when an old person, when we are all being challenged in ways that didn't exist before. I think that Steve Jobs has foisted into society not just the computer but the smartphone that has just totally changed the way we live. And I think that we have to really feel our way out of this, and any form of moral or ethical training has to encompass our ability to navigate and control the influences of these things, because they are really changing the way we live. And if, like anything, there are benefits to this new technology, and there are these terrible, terrible negative aspects. And we have to develop our inner strengths and our judgments and our abilities to maintain control over something that is working much faster than we are at taking us over. And this is, as when you introduced me, I should say that as you said, I am the former abbot of Ratu Monastery, but I'm the former abbot since 2 days. I just stepped down. While I was abbot, where I was really the head of this monastery, I was having to deal with maintaining a tradition that is ancient. As I say, it goes back to Nalanda. It goes back to the Buddhist order that was established by the Buddha 2,500 years ago. That when you become a monk, you are deciding to step out of society. You are deciding to literally take yourself out of worldly ways and devote yourself to an inner pursuit, an inner understanding that is meant to begin to transform you. The smartphone brings the outer world right to you. I keep pointing here because I usually keep my phone here. It's turned off and it's in my bag, but it's usually right here. It's an enormous challenge that is faced on all levels of society. It's really. I remember when I came to live in this country 38 years ago. I lived in this refugee settlement in Karnataka, in northern Karnataka, where we did not have a single phone. There was no phone. There was no old-fashioned phone. There was, as I said, the bus didn't even go through the settlement. And suddenly, today, every little farmer has a smartphone. Every car driving around, you see someone on the phone, half veering into traffic dangerously. To me, that's the greatest challenge. And the ethical, moral training that has to support the students who are lost and unable to deal with taking an examination. They have to be they have to be cultivated, they have to be trained, they have to in totally new ways. And I can't address that except to point it out. Yes.
Hi, sir. Western philosopher Frege talks about sense and reference theory, and since the main objective of our new education policy is to make things, or even education, conclusion oriented, and I'm just wondering about the fact that Hegel in his philosophy talks about thesis, antithesis, and the antithesis meets synthesis. How Nalanda tradition of teaching and learning was like.
What were the techniques of teaching
What
and
was
learning?
the dialective principles that were there in teaching and learning process?
So I think we went into this a little bit at the beginning, where we were talking about the study of basic logic, which was then applied to ideas, so that as new philosophical views evolved out of this process, they were then scrutinized by the same, let's say, logical tools. And the flaws in a new idea would have then been revealed, and the new idea would then be amended to rid itself of those inconsistencies, contradictions, flaws. It was that pursuit of truth that existed before the existence of Nalanda, and that really formed the basis for the establishment of Nalanda, that remained the heart of the institution.
Thanks for replying.
So,
providing as very materialistic and concrete
That's a big question. um, if the uh, the whole idea of learning, whether it's within one of these sort of monastic institutions or a university such as this, is the pursuit of truth, then, if I understand your question correctly, the one of the goals would be to provide the structure by which that process could be pursued as as well, in as subtle and profound a way as possible, with the openness of spirit and the openness of mind to lead you wherever the process takes you. I think that that was the idea that existed quite naturally in Nalanda before the existence of the institution, or the institutionalization of what had existed previously. And I think that, you know, one can talk about the importance of institutionalizing this process within today's universities, but I think that on some other level, it is the responsibility of each individual to lead his or her life in that pursuit. And the pursuit of knowledge, here maybe I'm getting beyond my depth, or I think that we have to really harmonize what we know to be, or what we in ourselves know to be good, valid, right, morally correct, ethically correct, with this pursuit for truth. And I think that the balance of these two is what makes for a fully balanced human being. And I think that they can become imbalanced, and I think that we have to work at maintaining that balance. We have to do it ourselves, and hopefully our loved ones and those around us help us do that. I don't know, I hope that I've at least addressed what you said. Yes. Absolutely. I think that the process of logically deconstructing, whether it's a pursuit of Advaita, Dvaita, Madhyamika, whatever it is, these are philosophical deconstructions, as you say, but they shouldn't lead one to nothing. They should, in that deconstruction, you begin to create a construction. There's a constructive aspect to deconstruction. There is I mean, in Buddhism, when they say that emptiness is not nothingness, emptiness is the basis for existence. It's the flip side of what exists. Well, I think I'll wrap it up by saying it's been a pleasure. I look forward to the next few days, and your comments and your interest in bringing this moral, ethical question into this conversation is, I think, wonderful, because that's what makes it all human, rather than just being conceptual. And I thank you.